Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we're going to be talking about the Astrology of May 2025. Hope that you're having a wonderful Taurus afternoon out there. We're recording this at the sort of the beginning of Taurus season here, which is always one of my favorites. Hope that you're able to get outside and enjoy some of the flowering of spring. We're going to go on a deep dive of the astrology of May today. We're going to be talking about lunations, ingresses, solar phases, out of bounds planets, malefic enclosures. We've got one of those fun times. We've got an I-Ching for you and an animal to help guide you through these interesting times. And yeah, we'll hang out, have a chat, and hopefully we'll have a wonderful time together. I'm just going to welcome a couple friends here. Welcome, my friends. Thank you so much for stopping in with me on this Friday afternoon. This is so much fun to be able to connect with all of you. Rachel Fletcher is here. What's up, Rachel? Says happy Taurus season from Roanoke, Virginia. Absolutely. Taurus season, one of my favorites. Just walking around the neighborhood, seeing the flowering trees. It's just so beautiful. We've been doing a lot of gardening, Rachel, as well. Getting our little tiny plot of land ready for planting more flowering and fruiting trees, service berries, hazelnuts, elderberries, all sorts of cool stuff. Been removing a lot of concrete, like chunks of concrete along the way, which has been a little crazy. It's kind of that Venus Saturn, conjunction happening in real time. But love Taurus season and super excited for what it has to offer. Tarja is here, says, hello, early bird. We have a chilly evening in Finland. Nice to see you, Tarja. Moi, friend. Moi, moi, moi. I hope that you're doing well over there in Scandinavia. Yeah, we're starting a little bit early here today. We've been doing this to kind of work a little bit around Mars. Mars has been rising towards the ascendant in the early afternoon. So we've been starting a little bit early at various times to maybe avoid starting our live stream with Mars in the first house. We may have it still as part of our journey here today, but sometimes as an astrologer, trying to make elections that work better for you, if it's helpful sometimes. So thank you so much for being here, Tarja, and I hope that we're checking in a little bit early for our European friends so that they don't have to stay up so late. So appreciate you. Hey B is here. Hello from Pacoge, New York. Pachogi? Patagay? Sorry if I'm butchering that name, but thank you so much for being here today, friend. That's a new name I'm seeing in the chat, and I'm just really excited that you're joining us here today. All right, friends, a couple announcements before we dive into the astrology of May 2025. You can go find me over at spencermichaud.com. If you're enjoying what you hear today, you can find me over at Spencer Michaud. I offer readings, including what I call a mythos reading, which is basically your natal chart broken down over 2 hours with fixed stars, tarot. We do all sorts of things related to Hellenistic astrology, timing techniques, etc. The decans. I really break down the decans of each of your planetary placements. You can find that at the Book Now button at spencermichaud.com. You can also find transit readings for the next 3 months ahead, as well as astrological tutoring and class offerings. We've got a nice class coming up again with my beautiful partner, Tanya Andrews. We've been doing a Dignity and Devotion planetary, 7 traditional planetary series where we're going to be breaking down each of the 7 traditional planets and talking about all their significations, mythology, how to utilize them within the different dignities, how to remediate them if they are in debility, how to create a ritual practice, how to create an altar space, all sorts of cool things related to the planet Jupiter coming up on Saturday, June the 14th. We also have Saturn coming up on August the 9th. Both of those are available to be signed up for on my website, spencermichaud.com. Tanya is amazing. She does great work with Third Coast Mojo. So she'll be joining us, and she's really taking the reins on this project and really doing a great job, like helping us understand how to create that ritual practice. So please join us for that. Of course, Third Coast Mojo has all sorts of magically elected materia. Tanya's going to help you work through how to create an election to draw down the energies of a specific planet. In this case, she has one featured right now called Blockbuster, which is a Mars in Capricorn election where Mars is in its exaltation. So a really great oil for getting through anything that might be challenging you or standing in your way. That is a classic conjure formula. Really great stuff. Check her out on Etsy at Third Coast Mojo and support local businesses. All right, we also have a newsletter that you can sign up for a 10% discount off of anything that I offer, readings, classes, etc. So if you subscribe to the newsletter, you can get updates on when we're going live, on when classes are being offered, on kind of how things are going in the sky. Take advantage of that and get your 10% off discount. And then finally, if you want to support the channel today, while we're live on YouTube, you can buy a super chat with a little $ in the chat, or you can go buymeacoffee.com and support the channel that way. Really goes a long way to helping me keep the lights on, buy equipment, subscribe to all these software programs that I'm utilizing, purchase books and reference materials, and just buy me really the gift of time to do all of this research and be able to pay all my bills and help me keep doing astrology. Sometimes it's a labor of love, but thank you so much for everyone who's helped me to keep this thing going with all of your generosity. All right, friends, let's kind of take a look at some of these big picture thoughts here. We have a new month coming, a little bit of a quieter month, I would say, although we do have one particularly big transit. We do have Saturn moving into Aries. So this is a big shift for an outer planet that only shifts signs once every few years. And unfortunately, it is moving into a place of debility, into its fall, a place where it's at the bottom of the wheel of fortune, a place that it's not very happy. We will talk about this more at length as we go into the program, but Saturn in Aries, Saturn generally represents sort of the blueprint that we create a society around, sort of the agreements that we have with one another, the architectural designs of the laws and commitments that we have to one another. And when it's in Aries, it could be, instead of working towards helping one another and working towards mutual beneficial relationships, society can become a little bit self-centered. It can become a little bit me-focused. It can become aggressive. It can glorify violence and authoritarianism, and those are some of the things that we're going to have to work through with Saturn moving through Aries. So we will talk about that. We'll try to figure out a way to counteract some of that challenging energy. We may also be bound to having to work under our own power a little bit more too. Saturn binds us to responsibilities, and we may have a responsibility to strike out in a way that is independent and in supportive of personal sovereignty. So we'll kind of try to look at it from multiple angles, but that's a pretty big transit or ingress, a changing of the guard for Saturn. We also have a Mercury Cazimi this month in Gemini, which is exciting. So Mercury is going to be conjoining the Sun in Gemini, 9 degrees Gemini. So this is going to be a really powerful Mercury Cazimi because Mercury is in its own home sign. Generally, Mercury Cazimis, when Mercury is conjoining the Sun, we get a burst of new information, we get a burst of new ideas, we get a burst of new energy for that planet, any planet that conjoins the Sun, but Mercury in particular is going to be giving us a new download. So that's very exciting. That's towards the end of the month, so we'll talk about that. And then finally, Mars and Venus are exiting their retrograde shadow. This is an experience of both of these planets that have been going through these lengthy retrograde phases. They are both direct at this point, but they will be breaking new ground. They've been kind of retracing their steps over the past few weeks, and in May, they're going to start traversing new territory, which I find kind of exciting. I think that maybe we'll take the lessons we learned from the retrograde periods and be able to apply them moving forward. All right. Let's see. Tarya says, I've tried to avoid more Mars rising when posting something business related. Yeah, it's a good idea, Tarya. I think that what we're doing when we elect a chart is we're looking at where the planets are, what houses, whether they're near the angles or not, and we're trying to choose what the right timing would be for an event. For those of you who are new to electing, it's astrological elections. So Mars being a planet that is out of sect, it is the out of sect malefic during the daytime. It can be very challenging to put it on an angle like the ascendant or the midheaven during the day. It's less harmful during the night, but still challenging. But generally in elections, you want to avoid having the malefics on the angle, especially if they're the malefic out of sect. Sometimes it's unavoidable. I've done live streams where Mars was just on the ascendant or in the first house or whatever, but if you can make small adjustments to avoid that, I don't think it can hurt. So yeah, it is wise to at least attempt to do so. We have Mars rising to the ascendant today around 12:45 or so Eastern time. So I don't think we're going to be done in time to avoid that completely, but as long as we practice kindness to one another, I think that we'll be able to get through it okay. All right. So lunations. These are our big picture thoughts for the month. We've got these kind of big three focal points: Saturn in Aries, Mercury cazimi, Mars and Venus exiting the retrograde shadow. Now we get sort of the medium range view with the lunations of the month, the new and full and quarter moons. So on May the 4th, may the 4th be with you if you're a Star Wars fan, we have a first quarter moon at 14 degrees of Leo squaring the Taurus sun. So the sun in Taurus, we'll talk about the sun in Taurus and creating the right pace. The first quarter moon may be challenging that pace a little bit. We're trying to find the right rhythm, but we might also be trying to get acknowledged for the work that we're doing with the moon in the second decan of Leo. So we have to balance out getting the work done and the practical applications, and also a feeling of authenticity and a feeling of recognition that may or may not be present for what we've been doing. I mean, and that's always something that's challenging when we have Leo placements. As a Leo ascendant myself, that was something when I was younger was very, very, very important to me. It's still not unimportant, but I have since started to learn, I think, that the work itself is what is important to me. And if people like it, that's awesome. And I'm super excited about that. And if they don't, well, then we're not for everyone. And that's something to remember with this first quarter moon. We have a full moon at 22 degrees of Scorpio on the 12th of May. So this is a full moon of our new moon in Taurus cycle. So that full moon may require us to release some forms that aren't serving us any longer, and be careful about glamorizing things from the past that aren't bringing us vitality anymore. So we'll talk about that in depth as well. We have a last quarter moon on May 20th at 29 degrees of Aquarius, squaring the third decan Taurus sun. And then finally, at the end of the month on the 26th, we have the new moon at 6 degrees of Gemini. Ingresses for the month, which is basically a fancy word for planets moving into new signs. Mercury is going to move into Taurus on May the 10th. The sun is going to move into Gemini on May 20th. Saturn into Aries on May 24th, as we mentioned earlier. And then finally, Mercury is going to return to its own home domicile of Gemini on May the 25th. So powerful Mercury placements, especially because we're going to have a little bit of an overlap with the sun in Gemini and Mercury in Gemini. The host is going to be able to provide resources for the sun very effectively in that regard. Solar phases. So these are anytime a planet stations retrograde or direct, anytime it's emerging from under the beams or becoming invisible going under the beams, or when we have cazimis. So we do have on May 2nd, Mars exiting its retrograde shadow at 6 degrees of Leo. So again, breaking new ground with Mars. On May the 4th, Pluto stations retrograde. So at 3 degrees of Aquarius, Pluto is stationing retrograde, maybe reviewing some of the challenges that we've been experiencing with Pluto in Aquarius, challenges around visibility, challenges around the needs of the collective versus the needs of the individual. Also fear of technology and things of that nature. We should talk a little bit today about Aquarius and when Pluto stations retrograde in regards to free speech. I think that one of the things I learned from an astrologer, Joy Usher, is that Saturn, and especially Aquarius Saturn types of relationships, oftentimes can only allow one certain narrative that supports one particular viewpoint to become visible. The rest is cast into darkness. So we've been seeing some of that recently in the world, and in the United States in particular, but I'm sure this is happening globally as well, where only a specific narrative is being supported in the or being brought to light, the rest cast into darkness. On the 16th, we have Mercury going under the sun's beams at 11 degrees of Taurus. That's when Mercury is getting prepared for its cazimi, its renewal in the heart of the sun. It's becoming invisible. This is Mercury, I would say this is Mercury visiting Olympus. Mercury retrograde going under the beams is Mercury in its psychopomp phase visiting the underworld. When we have Mercury going direct under the sun's beams, it's kind of like it's going to get a message from Zeus up on Olympus. I learned part of this technique from a good friend, Gary Caton, who is a kind of a Mercury Hermes expert. And I asked him about this. Well, he was talking a lot about Mercury retrograde at being under the beams, being the psychopomp underworld phase. And I was like, well, what about the other phase under the beams? He's like, maybe that's like Olympus, right? So some really important downloads that we could be getting that maybe are coming from a higher power, coming from outside of ourselves, whereas when we're seeing things coming from the retrograde phase, this is maybe going internal for our wisdom. Pay attention to outside sources of wisdom during this period. On the 16th as well, we have Venus exiting the retrograde shadow at 10 degrees of Aries. So two important kind of phasis moments. Mercury going under the beams of the sun and Venus exiting the retrograde shadow all on the same day could bring us some really interesting manifestations, downloads, messages, etc. On the 17th, the day after that, the sun is going to be conjoining Uranus. So sort of a cazimi for Uranus. I don't always call it cazimi because I think that because Uranus is not necessarily a visible planet, quote unquote, I don't know if it falls under the same auspices as the 7 traditional planets being renewed in the heart of the sun, but I think that it can infuse a sense of meaning and awareness of what our Uranian mission might be, I guess, so to speak. And that's going to be happening at 27 degrees of Taurus. So potentially an opportunity to become aware of how to remediate mistakes from the past. And then finally, on May 30th, Mercury is going to be cazimi at 9 degrees of Gemini, a renewal of Mercury in the heart of the sun in a decan where we may feel a little bit paralyzed by all of our options, and become aware of all the different pathways that we could potentially take. We're in the final days of Jupiter in Gemini as well, and Jupiter is moving through a decan that is related to making a choice and saying, hey, you can't keep all the options open. You kind of have to make a choice, and one of the twins has to be sacrificed so that the other can live, based on that story of Castor and Pollux, where one twin had to sacrifice some of his immortality so the other could live once again. But that's prepping us up for Jupiter moving into Cancer in June. So that's a really positive, I think, transit generally. It's Jupiter at its exaltation. So I think that the choices that we make now are going to pay dividends, and we're going to be able to grow something into fruition that is really important to us if we make wise choices. I'm doing this with my garden. I've been having to make a lot of choices about where things are going to go. Don't necessarily have room for everything that's there right now. I have some boxwood bushes that are nice and green throughout the winter, but they don't really provide pollinator habitat necessarily. They're not native to Michigan, and they're in a space that I'd like to plant some native fruit trees, some pawpaw trees, and I just can't keep everything. They have to go. They may be. I think we'll give them away to a neighbor if someone wants them, but those are the types of choices that we have to make. Like, because we have something important that we want to live, we might have to sacrifice something that is already been in place or whatnot. A minor example of those kind of choices, but you might have something like that in your life where you just can't keep everything. You can't keep every option open. You just have to commit to it to let things flourish. And my partner and I have been going back and forth with a lot of like different alignments for the different plants that we've bought. We bought a number of tree starts for our yard, and eventually you just have to put it in the ground and see what happens, because it's not going to grow if you just keep it in a pot forever. So that's very true with things in life. Sometimes you just have to plant your idea in the ground, let go of the other options, and see where it takes you. So we get to out of balance planets here. So we have out of bounds moons over the course of this month. So the moon will be out of bounds from May 1st to May 3rd, May 12th to May 18th, and then May 26th to May 30th. I'll tell you, these moon out of bounds periods, they really test your body. Last week, the moon was out of bounds, and I had to do a lot of work prepping the garden site for planting trees. And it ended up being way more than I anticipated because the space we're trying to plant, there's hundreds of pounds of concrete, broken concrete block that was probably a previous foundation or something. And I just was digging out concrete block after concrete block. I'll have to post, I really should post a picture of it somewhere because it is ridiculous. Um, it's like, imagine about five uh, cubic stoves, like 3 by 3, cubic stoves of concrete in a pile. And each of them are like basketball size to volleyball or to beach volleyball size. Um, it's wild. And the moon was out of bounds. I did that work for like 8 or 9 hours straight. And then I got really ill like the next day, probably from breathing in all the crap. Uh, I pushed my body to exhaustion. And it's a really good example of pushing our body beyond its limits. And then, kind of having to figure out how um, to reconcile all of that. So be careful around those periods of time. You could be getting very emotional. You could be pushing your body beyond its limits. You could maybe even feel a little bit ill during those times. So it's a regular occurrence. Moon goes out of bounds probably 2 or 3 times each month, but it's good to keep that in mind. It's the moon related to the body, kind of operating outside the norm. That's what out of bounds planets do. They are outside the normal, socially acceptable way that planet will operate. We do have one malefic enclosure during the month. So this is interesting because we have both Mercury and Jupiter going into a malefic enclosure for a few days. This is going to be between May the 20th and May the 24th. As soon as the sun moves into Gemini, that's when we're going to start seeing the malefic enclosure, like the aspects of Mars and Saturn making aspect rays to enclose both of those planets temporarily. Once the Saturn moves into Aries, that's when we see Jupiter, I believe, escape that. Okay, so Mercury will still be within that malefic enclosure until the 24th, but I believe on the 22nd, Jupiter will escape a little bit early, but we'll break that down in depth. Times when we have planets in malefic enclosure just feel like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like it felt like a malefic enclosure when I was digging out concrete. I think some of that might have been a manifestation of Venus conjoining Saturn. Like you're trying to do something beautiful, but Saturn says, "Oh, it's going to be a lot more hard work than you anticipated." But when Mercury and Jupiter are in malefic enclosure, communications, commerce may be challenging. Our hope may be a little bit dampened with a relationship to Jupiter. Sometimes Jupiter relates to faith, to bring all the elements together to get the job done. So I guess hang in there for that 2 to 4 day period, and we'll kind of hopefully give you some methods to navigate it gracefully. Rachel says, pawpaw trees grow all over my dad's farmland, and it's a very nostalgic food of my childhood. Yeah, we received some pawpaw trees from a group that is kind of doing some like guerrilla planting around the area here. And we got like 4 or 5 pawpaw trees, and really delicious. If for those of you who aren't familiar, a pawpaw tree is sort of like the banana of the Midwest, and maybe even the East Coast, like Rachel is talking about here. It's kind of a banana-like fruit. It's kind of got a really unique flavor, really delicious. People make ice cream out of it and smoothies and things like that. But it's a really important pollinator tree for a lot of different butterflies, moths, and insects in the Midwest. So we're going to be replacing those boxwoods, which are those kind of these boring little like hedge trees. They were here before we owned the property. And we're going to be replacing them with the native trees. So I think that'll be super fun. Rachel says, I believe my Mima used to make a pawpaw cobbler. Ooh, that sounds good. Pawpaw cobbler. We have to try that. It might be a few years before we get enough pawpaws to make pawpaw cobbler, but I'm looking forward to that. You'll have to give me your Mima's recipe, Rachel. That is some Taurus season bliss right there. So I'll keep you updated on our progress. I need to post more pictures about this for sure. But follow me on Instagram at Spencer Michaud, and I'll try to post progress pictures of all that. Again, it's been a lot of work, mostly just because of the pulling out obstacles. And before you can have healthy space for trees to spread their roots out, sometimes you have to remove obstructions, and that's true as a metaphor for life too. I think one of the things I really like doing as an astrologer is using nature metaphors and talking about things like biomimicry, like how we can mimic things in nature to find philosophical ways of living, of good living, right? Of alignment living, of living within the Tao. And I think that the same is true for astrology. You can look at the chart as a mycelial network of planets that are feeding one another in reciprocal relationships. And I'm going to be doing more research and talking about this moving forward. But I think anytime we can look to nature as a teacher, it bears fruit. Pawpaw. Pawpaw fruit, hopefully. All right, so that's our Mercury-Jupiter malefic enclosure. A little hiccup in May, but I think that we'll get through it. All right, friends, let's take a look at the chart here, and we'll see what we've got. Let's go here, and we're going to start out just looking at the sun in Taurus 2, just giving you an outline as to where things are. You can see the sun starting off at 11 degrees of Taurus, the second decan of Taurus. We'll break down those significations. You can see here that Jupiter is now in Gemini 3. Of course, that's the decan that says, hey, it's time to make a choice. Can't keep all of the options open. If you try to juggle too many things, nothing's going to work out, right? Sometimes the sacrifice is necessary to commit to your highest priority. So again, in our case, the highest priority are pollinator trees and fruiting, like food forest stuff. So the things that don't fit into that vision, while they're still nice, they have to go. And I'll tell you what, I've gone really back and forth with a lot of this. I'm really feeling the Jupiter and Gemini energy of like, man, there's so many different ways we could go. But I think when you finally commit to making the choice and accepting the fact that sometimes we have to make sacrifices to do so, it just takes a whole lot of anxiety and burden off of your shoulders. Trust me. I mean, I'm a person that lives in the ambiguous liminal spaces. And when I finally commit to something and say, this is my choice and my decision, I will live with the repercussions of that. It actually just feels so good. A lot of the pain that we experience is through indecision and indecisiveness. And a lot of it is because we are afraid to make mistakes, especially when you're doing something that has long-term ramifications. The reason I've gone back and forth with all this so greatly is that you plant a tree, that tree could live there for the next 50 to 100 years. It could get 50 to 100 feet tall, depending on the species. It has ramifications for the land. You have to be careful that it's not going to grow into power lines. You have to make sure it's not going to grow into the foundation of your home or disrupt anything that's underneath the surface, like pipes or things of that nature. There's real ramifications for these things. There's a reason why we have anxiety. But I think that sometimes if we make a mistake, not all of these mistakes are irreparable. And this is something I'm trying to embrace, is that it doesn't have to be perfect before we get it started. You can always move something around a little bit. If something doesn't work out, there usually are opportunities to remedy that moving forward. We have Mars in Leo. So Mars is kind of Mars is a little bit the elephant in the room this month. Mars is going to be coming off of the opposition with Pluto. We have the opposition with Pluto perfecting tomorrow, Saturday, the April the 26th, as I'm recording this. So we're going to be seeing the separation of that. We will be starting to see the separation of a big T-square between the Sun, Mars, and Pluto. we've seen a lot of different challenges with authority figures recently and all of this nature. We've been really struggling in our own community with different authority groups coming in and kind of creating a lot of disruptions in our community. We had an incident a couple blocks down the road from me where some people who had been protesting at the University of Michigan had their house basically raided and broken into, and they were put in handcuffs. All of their computers were taken, and then they were released like 15 minutes later. It was a wild scene, and this was literally on my street, like a block or two down the street. It's getting a little bit wild and concerning out there. Free speech has really been taking a hit lately. I think that oftentimes one of the fundamental core values and rights in America is to be able to peacefully protest. And it seems like that is starting to become threatened, especially that event happened as the sun was squaring Pluto. So Sun-Pluto squares often talks about confrontations with authority, of power systems that are kind of having when we're facing challenging power systems. I remember a few years ago, 2020, I was talking to a friend about this, but there were protests in Portland. And this was when the sun was opposite Pluto in the middle of the summer. I believe it was the summer of 2020. And there were lots of confrontations with authority out there, and people were being kind of like abducted. This is one of Pluto's kind of things. Pluto is inspired, right, or syncretized with that Greek deity Hades, who erupted from the underworld and abducted the maiden Persephone. So I have often seen, when we have Pluto contacts, abductions happening, people being carried away in chariots, and sometimes it's through the guise of trying to do it through nefarious means, through invisible means. I remember the vans that people were getting carried away from in Portland were unmarked, and the same thing's happening here. We had one thing I will say about that. We had a gathering of community members that gathered to witness this act, and we're kind of standing in the way. And I think that this is something that, where community comes together to support people in the community, I think is really going to be important moving forward. How do we counteract some of the challenges of authoritarianism and things of that nature? I think it's by helping each other, by building community, by trying to be kind to one another. All of those things can be helpful during these uncertain times. So interesting manifestations of the Sun, Mars, Pluto square that we're going to be seeing coming out of in May. The other thing to keep in mind is that Venus will be recently ingressed into Aries at the beginning of the month. We've got this little Aries stack up with Mercury in Aries, Neptune in Aries, and then Saturn will be joining Venus, Neptune, and Mercury in Aries. So spicy energy where people are probably fed up with things a little bit and not afraid to say something and to speak up about that. Okay. So let's talk about Taurus 2. And I'm going to bring the Decans of Taurus webinar slides to the stage. Here you can see the Six of Pentacles, the tarot card syncretized with Taurus 2. Book T calls it the Lord of Material Success. The Book of Thoth, just the Lord of Success. Austin Coppock calls this a Linga Yoni, which is a fertility stone that is known for you can kind of, it's got kind of a phallic appearance, and this decan is all about kind of inseminating the fields, right? We've got the daimon or spirit, the horai, which are basically the seasons. So how do we create rhythms and pace ourselves? We also have significations in this decan with balance, because it is of the Kabbalistic Sephira Tiferet, which is a solar decan, and a Sephira of centrality. You can see also in the Six of Pentacles themes of generosity and altruism potentially. So this might be where we're sharing the gifts that we have with one another. So generosity, altruism, establishing consistent rhythm, Tiferet and Asya, the balance of body and spirit, the balance of work and play is important in this decan as well. Procreative unions, we've removed all of the rocks in the first decan, hopefully, like they just keep coming. But I think that by this time, in the Decanic language, we've removed the rocks from the field, we've plowed the fields, and now they're ready to be planted. So procreative unions. This helps us to appreciate the present moment too. This is a decan of gratitude. I have the moon in this decan, and the moon is said to be exalted in this place. And I have found that, especially in my public life, because the moon in my chart is right smack dab on the midheaven in the 10th house, every time I am, I default back to generosity and altruism, things tend to work out better. If there are times where I default towards fear, scarcity mindset, hoarding, I don't know, kind of my lower impulses and natures, things tend to not work out. And there's been plenty of both. I'm not a perfect individual, and there's been times where I've had to really learn from some difficult, humbling experiences. But generally, with a midheaven in this decan, slow and steady wins the race. If I try to force the river, if I try to do too many things, it doesn't end up working out. If I don't do anything, I don't make any progress. So it's all about like showing up, doing as much as you need to do for that time, and then resting, and then recharging the battery. It's like watering a plant. We're going to be talking a lot about plants today. I've got plants on the mind. It's Taurus season. I've got a ton of trees and plants and gardening things that I've got to do. So this is going to be kind of our theme for the day, basically. When you're creating a garden, when you're creating fertility, you put the plants in when the time is correct. You can't put them in before the frost date, or they will die. So everything has a specific timing. You water them just enough so that they will get what they need. If you overwater them, they will suffocate and die. You try to get them the right light conditions. It's the same thing with things in our life. If you try to overwater the projects in your life, you can suffocate them. If you neglect them, the same is true. If you're not weeding the garden, if you're not taking care of it, if you're not paying attention to it regularly, not just once and intensely doing it one time, you've got to keep showing up. Taurus 2 is about showing up and showing up and showing up. I've been showing up on this channel since 2018, pretty much every week. I take maybe 3 to 4 weeks off a year from doing this podcast. And they're long form, so I try to do it once a week. I tried to do more short form things, but that sort of burned me out. I wasn't able to keep up that pace. That rhythm didn't quite work for me. To be able to do the preparation that I do, I need a week in between. But that's how I've built this channel, slow and steady, slow and steady. I've had some opportunities to maybe ascend quicker, but some of those opportunities weren't in alignment with my values. And that's another thing about Taurus too, is what's in alignment with your values. Taurus is all about values. It's like, what are you willing to do or not do? And a lot of times people who have Taurus placements say, you know what, that's not really supportive of what I believe in. And I'm willing to pass up good for great, right? It's the patience element. So patience with this decan. So slow and steady manifestation. Questions to ask yourself when the sun's moving through Taurus 2. What seeds are you sowing? What are the things in your life that you need to plant in the ground so that you can create future flourishing and abundance? You got to make a start, right? You've prepared the land. Sometimes we just have to take the leap. What routines will support your growth? This one is a big one, a really important one here. I came from a youth that had a lot of disrupted routines. I was moving from one place to the next. I had to go, I was a child of divorce, so I would spend 1 week at one parent's, another week at another's, and I would spend weekends here, over here. Just my routine got very disrupted. My dad was a good constant. Like he was very consistent, but my general routine was disrupted. And as an adult, I have learned that I really need that. I really need consistency in my routines. So I have an extensive morning routine where I get into my day very slowly. And I really suffer if I don't have that. Like, here's another example of this. This week, we had dirt delivered. Like, we had like 10 yards of dirt delivered, which was an adventure because we had a big tarp laid out. The guy came in a huge dump truck. We were trying to get it in 2 different deliveries to fit in a small space. And he missed the tarp. Like, he dumped the dirt like halfway off the tarp, creating like a lot more work for us to get it off the driveway and all this. But he came early too, and it was in the middle of my morning routine. I was just all flustered, and it sort of carried over into the rest of the day. The point being is that our routines are very important, but sometimes things happen, and sometimes we have to be flexible. This is not a decan known for flexibility. This is one of the most fixed decans in the zodiac. It is the fixed sign of Taurus. It is the fixed, quote unquote, decan, the middle decan. So we may have trouble adjusting our routines around this place, but I do think a little routine goes a long way. You don't have to become a slave to it, but I think that having something you can count on that gets you into the rhythm of your day, especially, can be supported during this period of time. Next question, can you work with natural cycles to create fertility? This is sort of an innate Taurus wisdom, is knowing when the right time to do something is and when the conditions aren't correct for it. This is through observation of nature. You probably don't want to plant new baby trees or plant starts in the middle of winter. It's kind of a common sense type of thing. You make observations that you try to plant that start or that tree in the middle of winter, its chances of survival are dramatically lower. And the same thing is true with some projects that we commit to in our life. You have to be able to tune in to whether the conditions are correct to support that project. If you are overwhelmed and you have 15 projects going and you get offered this other project that will take up a ton of time and you know that it's going to screw up all the other things, the conditions may not be correct for that. You have to determine which of those things is going to move the needle most for you. But sometimes, like, let's say you really want to do an expensive home remodel. Well, if you have a bunch of debt you have to pay off, or if you have a bunch of bills coming, like I don't know, medical expenses or something, it might not be the right time to do that. The conditions aren't necessarily correct. So tuning into the natural rhythms is very, very important during Taurus season. What virtues practiced over time will lead to success? Again, we've talked about practicing your values over time, showing up for your life, showing up for your community, sharing with one another, and cultivating your character through that. As a gardener, you learn what works and what doesn't over time. When I first started gardening, I planted my garden just super, super densely, and things didn't really work as well or get as abundant as they could because they didn't have space to spread out. And you learn over time to create that space. Same thing with the values that we practice as human beings. Sometimes as a young person, we get really enthusiastic, we get very excited, we try to pursue things with gusto that eventually turn out to not necessarily be right for us. And we have to learn over time what is right for us and where we fit in as far as the journey of our life. So we learn that through time. So you practice a virtue even if you make a mistake. A lot of the virtues that we learn and values that we learn are through failure, quote unquote, right? Through making a mistake, through feeling discomfort, through reacting inappropriately to a situation. The real part, I think, that where Taurus can really thrive is learning from those mistakes and then trying to do something different the next time. And it can be really difficult to change if you have heavy Taurus energy. I often compare it to an oil tanker trying to change directions. It is a slow change. Like, let's say you're trying to beat an addiction and you have heavy Taurus placement. It's probably less likely to work if it's kind of a cold turkey thing. That's probably more of a Scorpio type of deal. But if you slow and steady start adding in healthy habits and removing some of the toxic ones one day at a time, and you build on that, it's sort of that AA thing. You get the first day, you get the first week, first month, and you celebrate those little victories. And eventually it becomes a habit. Eventually it becomes part of you. So really important here. What tangible achievements have you manifested? It's good to count your blessings during this decade and really to acknowledge and have gratitude for people around you. And then finally, how can you share your abundance? This is one of I think, the secrets to Venusian energy, which Taurus is a part of. If you share your gifts with others, that can cause it to multiply. You look at nature and you look at things like the service berry. The service berry, Robin Wall Kimmerer, I can't recommend this book enough, and Braiding Sweetgrass, she teaches us through the indigenous botanical wisdom that these relationships are reciprocal. And when we share with one another, like the service berry shares its berries with the robins, like it shares nutrients with the things underneath the soil, it creates this web of mutual flourishing. And Taurus can teach us that too, especially Taurus too, that when we share our gifts with others, we share our abundance, we create this reciprocal flourishing, mutual flourishing. The opposite is also true when we hoard resources, when we try to take more than our fair share. That creates scarcity, not only for others, but eventually for ourselves, because it can plant the seeds of our own demise and our own undoing. So you're always kind of trying to maintain a homeostasis, in my opinion, as a person and as natural systems. All right, so let's take you through the Taurus to May 1st through May 10th areas. We've got all of the kind of energy that the canvas is going to be painted on here, basically, right? So that's our mental awareness that we might have. All right, so the first day of the month, we have Venus conjoining Neptune here, okay? And Mars exiting the retrograde shadow. So Venus, Neptune in Aries. So this is Venus in her exile, a place where she is more impatient, more aggressive, more yang than she might be if she were in a home sign of potentially Taurus or Libra. So that is not always necessarily a bad thing, but it comes with a warning. It comes with a warning that generally Venusian energy is receptive. Not all the time. There is a warrior Venus, a morning star Venus, which we do have here. So this is a very warrior spirit Venus. But I do think it carries a warning not to be so aggressive that we're pursuing something that would be better left to let it come to us. And especially with a conjunction with Neptune, because what we are pursuing could be distorted, could be not as it appears. So we have the double whammy of wanting something very badly, but also maybe having our vision distorted by Neptune. And even so far as we're going to find transcendence through this desire that we have. This could be through a relationship. It could be through something we want to purchase. It could be through an ideal. It's just something to be very aware of and be careful of as the month begins. As Venus Neptune is enough to create illusions, Venus Neptune in Aries could be the pursuit of an illusion very aggressively. Mars exiting its retrograde shadow, we're just breaking new ground. Once Mars crosses about 6 degrees of Leo, we're going to be separating from the opposition from Pluto. We're going to be separating from the square from the sun. So I do think that Mars's condition really starts to improve in May. So not to say that we won't have Mars challenges, but I do think that we're sort of out of the potential. I'm going to hesitate to say that we're out of the worst of it, because there could be all sorts of other things that could contribute to feeling discontent. We do still have a Mars-Uranus square to navigate in the weeks ahead, but I do think we've got Mars out of its fall, Mars out of its retrograde, Mars out of its shadow, Mars out of its opposition to Pluto, as far as the perfection of that aspect. And we might start to see things hopefully calm down a little bit martially. On the 4th, so we kind of skip ahead here to May the 4th, and again, happy Star Wars Day. That's where we have our first quarter moon. So two things going on here. We've got the first quarter moon, and we've got Pluto stationing retrograde at 3 degrees of Aquarius. So let's start with this first quarter moon here. We touched on it a little bit in the big picture thoughts, but we've got the sun and the moon at roughly 14 degrees of Taurus and Leo, making that square. And then we can just break this down here. Well, let's look at this first. So there's our square. Oops, that's a weird one. Okay, so we've talked about creating a consistent rhythm. We've talked about fertility, generosity, sharing. Leo moon, second decan of Leo, generally is associated with the 6 of Wands. That card shows kind of like a victory parade. That decan is about the victory of authenticity, the victory of feeling acknowledged by our community for who we are. This square, which is the first quarter square of the new moon in Taurus, could be where we're trying to create fertility, but where we might feel like we need some more support, like we may be trying to work through a new persona. We might be trying to find our authentic rhythm, not one that society tells us that we should embrace. Because if we were to go by society's rhythms, we'd just be grinding all the time. We would never rest. We would never acknowledge the winter or the fall. Everything would just be growth, 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 growth. So how do we find our own authentic, realistic, in alignment with nature and the Tao rhythms, rather than trying to conform to the rhythms of late stage capitalism? Those are real questions, because as we get further along in the cycle of this economic philosophy, it becomes harder and harder, because the wealth inequality gap starts to become wider. There are more and more compromises that people are being forced into to maintain their positions, and it can be tough. I've spent a good portion of my life trying to figure out how to be me within a society that doesn't always support people exactly like me. Sometimes it does, but it has felt like swimming upstream in a lot of ways. And that takes a lot of inner fortitude to keep going in your chosen directions. And this might be part of the first quarter moon too, is how can you find that inner strength to keep going in your chosen direction, to be your authentic self, and to find the rhythms and routines and fertile spaces that work for you. Tarya says, amen to that. Mars might be easier, having a Mars perfection year. Tarya, you and me both, friend. I am in a Mars perfection year, and it has been a journey, to say the least. I'm looking forward to maybe Mars calming down a little bit, and maybe just not being as challenged as it has been over the past few months. So we'll get through it together, Tarya. We're one step and one day at a time, right? But it does test you, right? I have been doing lots of physical work with Mars as a perfection time lord. I wish I could show you this. Hold on a second. I think I can show you. I think I can show you, friends. I want to just show you this real quick, because this is Mars. This is what's been happening in a Mars perfection year. Tarya, I'm just going to commiserate with you for a minute here. So I'm looking for a picture of this pile of concrete that we have pulled out of our yard. So I'm going to stop my share for just a second. I don't know if y'all can see this, but that is what we pulled out of a portion of our yard. And that is, that's probably like 10 feet wide on every side. Like, each of those pieces is like a basketball. It's been wild. and it's tested me to my physical limits. So that is sort of an interesting Mars kind of year manifestation, right? Is how do we overcome physical challenges? How do we direct martial energy in, yeah, Rachel says, wow, a very Mars, Saturn, Pluto photo. Yeah, I'll tell you, there have been times where I've just been like, man, if I have to pull one more concrete, like 30 to 50 pound concrete block out of the ground, I'm going to explode. But it really, I think, Mars needs a job. And it has given me a job to do where I can direct some of that, anger, physical energy towards something productive. One of the Orphic hymns to Mars, or the Orphic hymn to Mars, talks about turning the weapons of war into plowshares. And I'm a firm believer of that. I think that turning conflict energy into productive energy, removing, Mars is a planet that removes things, removing obstacles, digging. I've got a spade. That's a very martial tool. I've got a crowbar. I've been sticking in there and pulling crap out. And I'm not a huge dude. I'm like 5'10" or 5'11" and about 100, and I guess I'm about 160 pounds now, but I wasn't even that heavy for a period of time. I lived a lot of my life at like 145 pounds, but I'm wiry strong, right? But just pulling out this really heavy stuff, and it is. I hope I'm propitiating Mars, Yeah, Martian boulders, Tracy says, absolutely. Sunny D says, yes, I had a Mars perfection too. Ugh. And Taria says, oh, you too, good luck. Yeah. Well, and again, to me, it's very instructive. If you're having difficult martial challenges, try not to direct that energy towards your relationships. One of the things that I've been going through with this is, me and my partner have been working on this together. Sometimes we'll wear some Mars materia, got this really great stuff. We have a lot of Mars and Capricorn material that Tanya has made. I also have some stuff from Sphere and Sundry from the Copics, one of which is an Antares oil that is like a badger spirit, and badgers are known for digging in the ground. So I'll put some badger oil on, and I'm like, all right, I've got the energy of the badger to go dig into the ground. And the interesting thing with Mars and Antares is if you don't direct that to the ground, it's gonna just flail around you. So there have been a few times where Tanya and I have been going through this very stressful project and just kind of getting our tempers have gotten we've lost our tempers, and then we'll stop in the middle of it and be like, all right, let's not direct this energy towards each other. Let's direct this energy towards the project, towards the ground, towards the obstacles. And being able to refocus that energy in the moment is a really important martial skill, So if you find yourself in conflict with others, how can you turn that energy into say, well, where can we make this productive? Where can we, get angry at something where we can make a difference rather than destroy something fragile like the bonds that keep people together? Does that make sense? And then every relationship goes through testing, especially when you're under a lot of stress. I think that everyone has their limits, and we all get frustrated. And, after the 6th or 7th wheelbarrow full of concrete block, you start getting frustrated. It's like, it's never going to end. But yes, a good martial reflection point is try to make something productive out of it. Okay, so let's keep going. So there's our first quarter moon. Pluto retrogrades are at 3 degrees on this day. Generally, the outer planets like Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune spend much of the year retrograde. So this isn't like a huge thing in my radar, but it might be, we might see some backtracking on some of the attacks on free speech, the attacks on immigration, or immigrants. The first decan of Aquarius, I'm pretty sure I previewed this in Pluto in Aquarius 1 video that you can check out. Aquarius 1 is really about going off into exile and, you know, understanding and finding beauty within exile. So sometimes with Pluto is a planet that can show us the corruption underneath the surface. And we're seeing a lot of that come out with some of our government systems and how they're dealing with others or othering people. So Pluto moving retrograde, we might see some shifts, some backtracking with some of that. I hope so, because I've been really horrified by what I've been seeing from the United States government in regards to treating anyone who is other. And that is... that's something that I hope that we can really start to move away from. So that's Pluto stationing retrograde on the 4th. We get to the 5th and 6th. And here we're going to see Mercury sextiling Jupiter and Venus sextiling Pluto. So some minor aspects with the benefic planets and the outer planets. Okay, so Mercury and Jupiter coming together within the sextile from Aries to Gemini. These two decans, I think that they're very communicative. We may be trying to win over a hostile crowd with Mercury in Aries 3, and we may be trying to win over someone's viewpoint to make the choice, Jupiter in Gemini 3, that we want to live, right? Remember we said that with Jupiter in Gemini 3, we've sort of got an inflection point where we've got to make a decision. We can't keep all options open. And you may be advocating for the choice that you really want to happen with Mercury making a sextile to Jupiter from these two decans. Now the Venus-Pluto sextile, again, strong desires with Venus in Aries 1, trying to strike out into new territory, potentially a fight for independence, but also running into some of the challenges of feeling cast out into exile, feeling like it's almost dangerous on some level to express an opinion. This has been something that I've been very cognizant of and aware of for a long time. Like, I try to be, I don't know if the word's coded, but I try to be judicious about what I say on my channel, because I understand that it's not always safe to say things. And with the advent of artificial intelligence and with, people that are kind of like using technology to sweep through the internet, you have to be a little bit cagey about how you express opinions that are contrary to the powers that be. So I think that this might be part of this equation as well, is that, we're seeing this kind of attack on free speech and pushback on authoritative power, and we have to reconcile with that moving forward. Tracy says that quarter moon is conjunct my Mars, Uranus, and Leo. Thank you for that information, Spencer. Oh, thank you, Tracy. Yeah, hang in there. I mean, it's there's always going to be challenging aspects in the sky. Mars, Uranus, Mars, Pluto tend to be ones that peak astrologers' attention. Saturn, Mars aspects are always ones that are a little funky. But sometimes we need a little bit of conflict and challenge to propel us in new directions. I remember a specific Mars-Uranus situation I had a couple years ago where I had been putting up with a situation that wasn't working for me and the other party. And that Mars-Uranus square just really drove me over the edge of saying, I can't do this anymore. Can't do this situation. I've got to move forward. And it really opened up some things. So even though it could be uncomfortable and difficult, sometimes those aspects can open things up for us in ways that we may have been reluctant to pursue. Okay, let's keep rolling here. See how much we can get in before Mars ascends to the ascendant. I think we've got like 40 minutes or so. So this actually gets us to Taurus 3. So let's talk about Taurus 3. Not a ton of non-lunar aspects in the second decan of Taurus, but let's go back to our Taurus screen here, and let's talk a little bit about Taurus 3. Here we can see the 7 of Pentacles, and I'm going to stretch out a little bit here. Make sure you do me a huge favor, friends. Why don't you go over to that like button and hit it to assist us in our algorithmic journey. If you could subscribe to the channel if you're not already, that also is very, very helpful. If you want to make a donation to the work that I'm doing via super chat, always appreciated. Stretch it out. Get a drink of water. Move your hips a little. That's one I have to be cognizant of. And sometimes my hips get real tight when I'm doing this work. Okay, we're back. Let's dive into Taurus 3. So this is going to be the time period between May 10th and May 20th. So here we see the 7 of Pentacles, and you see a farmer, a gardener. This is me. This is me lately. Sitting, leaning against his shovel, his hoe, his whatever he is that he's utilizing here, and contemplating how much work there is left to go, and maybe even some of the blight that we see in this card. This card is inspired by the potato famines of the 1840s in Ireland. Pamela Coleman Smith, being a UK citizen, would have probably remembered that time. She was she made this deck in 1909, if I'm not remembering correctly. So old, and she would be old enough to remember that. And this decan is called the Lord of Failure, or the Lord of Success Unfulfilled. Austin Kaba calls it a string of prayer beads, oftentimes because we need to surrender at this decan. It's a Saturn ruled decan. There's a spirit in the decan called the Litai. The Litai were these hobbled old women that followed behind Eight, who is a kind of a demon who would step on the heads of mortals through its rashness to get where it wanted to go. So this is a decan of atonement. This is a decan of surrendering to a higher power, of humility in the face of nature. Sometimes all of our planning, no matter what we do, we can't always control the weather. And a lot of times you'll go and you'll do everything right, but then a storm will come and wash something away, or wind will knock something over. And it's not your fault. It's just a force that's greater than all of your planning. And this decan teaches us that. So floods, droughts, pestilence, natural disasters, humility before nature, assessing your efforts and remediating mistakes. This is a great decan for taking stock of how your efforts have produced, whether they've produced success or not, right? And then if it's not working out the way that you had hoped, making a change, making a shift. Netzach and Asias, enduring material hardship can be a signification in this decan. Atonement, surrender to a higher power, having faith in the process. This is a maintenance part of Taurus, maintenance decan. You've plowed the fields, you've planted the seeds. Now you have to show up and weed the garden and make sure that there's not any pests that are threatening your crops. You have to keep doing the hard work and showing up each day to do what is necessary. There are some challenging fixed stars in this decan, which give it sort of a challenging reputation. It is probably the more difficult part of Taurus. So between the 10th and the 20th, we might be having some difficulties we have to overcome. The two fixed stars that are overlapped with this decan are Capulus at 24 degrees, which is the sword of Perseus, so that rashness, that cutting energy. And then Algol at 26 Taurus, which has a notorious reputation, the blinking eye of Medusa, as being one of violence, being one of intensity. It can be a fixed star of protection, especially of feminine energies, but we just have to be very cautious around it. The Chinese astrologers called it piled up corpses. So it is imperative that you keep your cool when aspects are hitting Algol, and we're going to see that Uranus is going to be hitting Algol during the Sun in Taurus 3. So our conjunction of the Sun and Uranus are going to be happening fairly close to Algol, 26, 27 degrees. So we have to be very careful about maintaining our cool, maintaining our temper, not losing our head, etc. You may have some inspiring ideas about how to protect yourself, though, as well. So that could be a positive viewpoint to see. So questions to ask yourself during Taurus 3. What results or consequences have your efforts produced? How much work is left? How much is further to go? How many more concrete blocks do you have to pull out of the garden before you can plant your trees? What went wrong? And did you learn from your mistakes? I mean, that's the thing. We can't avoid making mistakes, but we can learn from them. We can try to learn from them and try to make adjustments. This is a decan of adjustments. Did you rush something? And if you did, can it be redone correctly? We oftentimes feel like we have to rush through something to meet a deadline, to meet something that is, time sensitive. And oftentimes that can lead to a corner cut here and there. And if that happens, and sometimes you don't know any better. Sometimes you're just learning for the first time, and you may make a mistake out of inexperience. And if the opportunity arises, sometimes you can go back and fix something. This is a great decan to check in on your insurance. What's funny about this is all of our car and house insurance renews around this decan, and the cost of it is going way up. I think insurance is going up all over across the board, but we may be having to review whether this insurance company is something that we want to stick with because of how much the rate is increasing. So insurance is a really interesting manifestation of this decan as well. Insuring against disaster, making sure that you have the right protections in place. Anticipating problems in the future is something that you can do in this decan. Can you protect what you've cultivated from blight, right? Like this is why we have insurance policies. This is why we weed the garden and get rid of pests so that our harvest can be bountiful. And then finally, where do you need to surrender to a higher power? Even if we do everything right, again, sometimes the universe has a different plan. And oftentimes this decan can push us to the very edge that says, all right, I'm just going to let go. I'm going to stop swimming against the current, and I'm just going to let the process play out, right? This is how working with nature sometimes works. There's only so much you can do. You can't make it be sunny one day. You can't make it rain one day, although maybe there are some rituals that you can do. But in general, you have to flow with the changes. Here's another example of this. We've got trees coming in the mail. We ordered a number of native trees. The shipment is about a week late. Like it got tied up in the mail, and these living little baby trees are just hanging out in the mail. And we'll see if they arrive intact, alive, etc. Something outside of our control that if it doesn't work out, we'll have to remediate that somehow. So, like I said, you can do everything right, and then there can be a holdup here and there, and you have to make an adjustment. All right, so let's go back and take a look at what we're going to experience. So the first thing that we see, let's get our chart to here's Taurus 3, May 10th. Taurus 3, we're going to start out with Mercury moving into Taurus, out of Aries, into Taurus, potentially slowing things down mentally for us. This decan of Taurus is ruled by Mercury. So we have really kind of an empowered Mercury in Taurus 1. And it really empowers us to make plans. There is a caveat to that. The reason we plan in Taurus 1 sometimes is because we have a jolt to our material security. So oftentimes we get the plan in because we're like, oh no, I've lost a client, or I've lost a job, or I've lost a abundant source. And it says, well, I better start planting and plowing the fields to replace that, or to expand what I want to do. So sometimes a fear of scarcity can lead to making plans to replenish or expand our abundance. So really powerful Mercury for making plans and making practical plans. The reason why Mercury can work so well here is that this is not a pie in the sky Mercury. This is not Mercury in Pisces 3, at its fall, where we might make plans that are just like completely unrealistic, but hopeful, right? This is one where we say, let's take stock of everything we have. Let's look at our budget. Let's be real. Let's make realistic choices, and let's map it all out. And that is I think a really important action to take when you have Mercury and Taurus. And again, just going back to the insurance question, asking questions is a mercurial signification. It is a planet that casts doubt. So for us, maybe it'll be like, well, let's shop around a little bit to see if we can get the best rate possible with the best coverage and protection. It's asking the questions about how to plan for future security and to see, oh, can we get a better price? Can we negotiate something? So that's an example of how Mercury and Taurus might work, especially in the first decan. Okay. That brings us to our full moon in Scorpio. So this is May 12th. The moon is going to be coming full at 22 degrees of Scorpio, opposing the sun at 22 degrees Taurus. Mercury is co-present. Sun is starting to apply to Uranus, not quite within the 3-degree, I believe that's called colasis. But we have the moon in its fall in Scorpio, a place where the moon is not super comfortable. It's being hosted by Mars, which is squaring in the overcoming square to the moon. Not exact by degree, but by whole sign. And then we still have that kind of that T-square with Pluto. Mercury is going to be squaring Pluto at this full moon. So the Mercury-Pluto square is important. Again, put 2 and 2 together. How do we become integrative with this? You've got Pluto in a place that is related to fear around exile, fear around how we connect as a society, around technology, around limitations of communications. And then you have Mercury in a decan that is related to fear of scarcity. So our minds at this full moon might start to get a little bit worried because of the things that are out of our control. Okay, sun moving through Taurus 3. We might be feeling a little bit of the pinch at this point. Mercury, Pluto, we might be starting to get a little bit nervous about our resources. And that makes a lot of sense for Scorpio 3 moon. The Mars in the overcoming square could be a little bit challenging as well. The moon in Scorpio 3 is really about knowing when to let go of a form that isn't serving you anymore. Man, I'm just making all sorts of connections in my head just as far as like what we have to do around that period of time. There are times when a form is correct and it just outlives its vitality. It's not providing what it used to before because conditions change. Like for an example, like just using a very mundane example of like, for many years, this insurance company worked out very well. It was affordable and it provided what we needed insurance-wise. And like, let's say the rate has changed and that company can no longer provide that service, then that form isn't providing vitality anymore. Now, I will not belabor this point too much, but it may just be that that's how much things cost now. But that's why you do the research. And if you have something in your life that feels like it's not working for you anymore at this full moon, the important thing is not to glamorize something that has outlived its time. That's the real danger of Scorpio 3. You can see it in the Seven of Cups, where you see this figure with all these illusions presented in front of them. And the danger with this deck, especially with the moon here, is getting too nostalgic about something that really needs to just be returned to the earth. Okay. And it's very important to let go and to compost during these periods. And that may be the way to remediate the mistakes of the past, is to let go and return something to the earth. It's a hard thing to do. And it's not something that we're taught to do very easily in Western civilization. We're taught to ignore death in America. And there's not a lot of acknowledgement of the need to let go, the need for less, the need for change. And I think it's something that we sort of have to cultivate as individuals if society isn't teaching us that. So a little bit of a sticky full moon because of the condition of the moon and the overcoming square with Mars. This again, with Mars at 11 degrees of Leo, there may be some identity issues wrapped up with it. There may be an acknowledgement from your community that you may be lacking. You know, my partner has Mars at 11 degrees Leo retrograde. And sometimes she doesn't always get the credit for the work that she does. You know, Mars separating us from the parade, right? And we may not be getting the accolades that we hoped for. But I think at the end of the day, again, I will reiterate that if you know, and you can look yourself in the mirror at night and say, I did the best that I could with the information and the resources that I had and the skills that I had in that moment, I think you can sleep good at night. You know, like whether someone recognizes your efforts or not, you know in your heart that you've done the best that you could. And if you didn't, if you haven't done the best that you can, then that's when you re-examine and say, well, how do I improve? How do I offer up repentant prayer and make changes? It's either way, it can lead to a positive outcome. All right, so that's our full moon here. No benefic aspects, which is also a little bit kind of yucky. Both of the benefics, Jupiter and Venus, are in aversion to the full moon. Yeah, this one looks a little hairy. This one looks a little hairy. But we'll get through it. We'll do a whole live stream on it, and we'll see what the I-Ching and the animals have to say. And we'll try to work through it together as a community. All right, if we go now towards the 16th. 16th is kind of a big day in May. Here we have Mercury going under the beams of the sun. And this is at 11 degrees of Taurus, so within 15 degrees of the sun. And it is going into a period of invisibility. We talked earlier about Mercury visiting Olympus. And the decan that it enters invisibility, I think, is important. We may be having negotiations behind the scenes. We may be having conversations behind the scenes about our rhythms, our routines, about how we share with one another. And it may not be visible. It may not be something that is out front. A lot of the good works that people do are, we don't get credit for, right? Or people don't get credit for. And if like I said, at the end of the day, if you know in your heart that you've done the right thing, that should be enough. As human beings, we do love the approval of our peers. It's just human nature. Because we're social creatures, having the approval of the group was a life or death type of experience at various points of our evolution. And to be fair, can still be. But I used to teach this in my songwriting class, like, because people got really nervous about sharing their songs. And I would tell them, hey, you know what? Yes, maybe back in the day, if someone didn't like you or like what you were putting out there, you could be ostracized, and that could feel like a life or death situation. But now, if someone doesn't like your song, you're probably not going to die, you know? And yes, there are other situations where that's not necessarily true, but I think in many situations, needing the approval of our peers is not necessarily a life or death situation. Although, like I said, the caveat is that things are getting weird, and I'm not taking any of those previously held notions for granted anymore. So Mercury moving into the sun's beams, a moment of phasis, a potential download from Olympus, a directive from, I guess, maybe even from Zeus, the Lord of Olympus, an infusion of awareness of what we need to do next, maybe to fix something. Now, Venus is going to exit her retrograde shadow at 10 degrees of Aries, breaking new ground. Venus has now moved into the second decan of Aries by this time. And it's more about sharing values, more about sharing a royal decree. The first decan of Aries is more about saying, this is who I am not. I reject this. Okay. Second decan more has to do with, hey, this is who I want to be, and this is what I believe in. So that could be something that we're looking at here. All right. So we move forward another day here, and we have our Sun-Uranus conjunction. So there's the Sun and Uranus coming together at 27 degrees of Taurus. Uranus is interesting to me. Robert Schmidt, the founder of Project Hindsight, or one of the founders, who translated ancient Greek texts, very much a traditional astrology guy. He was asked about the outer planets, and he had a sort of somewhat vague answer, but the best answer that he was giving was he considered planets like, if he had to compare them to planets, to traditional planets, he compared Uranus to a transcendental sun. Okay. He compared Neptune to a transcendental moon and Pluto to a transcendental Mercury. In the sun brings us an awareness. The moon is substance. So we had universal substance, universal awareness, universal mind, the one mind and the one thing. Uranus, the one mind, Neptune, the one thing. And then Pluto, the catalyst of change, the mercurial achemical mixer, right? So if we take Schmidt's understanding of Uranus, we may have an awareness on a bigger scheme. And with the sun coming together with Uranus, the key term awareness is very, very much highlighted. So we could have an awareness of what we need to do as a society to overcome mistakes of the past. We may have a really interesting experience of humility in the face of nature. Look at all the things that Taurus 3 represents. One of the highlights, or lowlights, however you want to think of it, of Taurus 3 Uranus transit. So we've been dealing with natural disasters. We've been dealing with forest fires. We've been dealing with hurricanes. We've been dealing with tornadoes. We've been dealing with extreme weather events that are increasing in their frequency. So there could be an awareness of like something that we have to do to atone for the mistakes of the past so that we can have a habitable planet. There could be awareness of mistakes that we've made socially with one another. I think it's really an opportunity to do something outside of the norm, you know, to do something to shatter our old illusions and really act outside of our character, our normal stick in, you know, the mud type of experience, to do something that fixes something. So this could be an awareness of like, wow, I've had this problem for a long time, but man, I've finally found the solution. I had an experience with Jupiter conjoining Uranus 3 a few years ago now, I guess. And I had a breakthrough with my diet. Like I had an awareness of an allergy that I had. I'm very allergic to the sugar fructan. And I always thought it was a gluten sensitivity, but it's actually a fructan sensitivity, which you find in things like onions and garlic, etc. And it was a huge breakthrough because when I cut those things out of my diet, my digestive issues completely resolved. So it wasn't necessarily a past mistake. It was just an adjustment based on a problem that had been chronic for a long period of time. So I think this is a really unique opportunity potentially to have an awareness of how to fix a problem that you've been dealing with for quite some time. So don't be afraid to do something outside the norm to shatter to liberate yourself from a problem in the past with the Sun-Uranus conjunction on the 17th. That brings us to the bending of the nodes. So Mercury is going to square Mars on the 18th, and Jupiter is going to be at the bending of the nodes. So here's Mercury and Mars square. So this is a kind of an echo of the Sun-Mars square that we had not too long ago. And then also we have Jupiter here at the bending of the nodes, squaring the nodes. And generally that is a turning point for a planet. We are having the sort of the peak experience of Jupiter in relationship to that north node, a place of increase, Pisces. And we're going to start heading towards a place of decrease, the south node in Virgo. So we may be having to let go of some old habits, routines. We're having to resolve things in the Virgo area of our life. We're moving towards a letting go at this bending of the nodes. And again, maybe because of the realization that we had with the Sun-Uranus conjunction, it will lead to a release. Do me a favor, friends. Don't be afraid of the releases in your life. Like it is so, I don't know if comforting is the right word, but it is a relief when you can let go of things that don't serve you. And I feel like this is an opportunity to do so. You've got Mercury squaring Mars, so that there could be some sticky moments. You know, we're asking a lot of questions about how our routines and how our abundance is going to mesh with our sense of identity. But we also just have a choice to make. We say, hey, we can't keep all the plates spinning. If we want to move towards resolving attachments to legacies, I think is one thing that I would see with the third decan of Virgo, South Node. Oftentimes we get attached to what we think we should be doing with our lives. And I know this is a really important thing for me too, because I have Saturn, Mars, both Saturn and Mars in Virgo 3. I've always had an awareness of legacy. This is part of the problem that I get really hung up on oftentimes, is because of my hyper awareness of the future. Sometimes it's hard for me to live in the present. Like when I was doing music more full time, I was so hyper aware of like, what would someone 30 years or 50 years or 100 years from now think of this song, that I would just I'd be too perfectionistic about it. Same thing with like planting this garden. It's like, well, what's this going to look like 100 years from now when someone else lives in this house? Like, is this tree going to be too tall? It's like, well, that's a problem for way down the road. And it's important to think about those things. But if you get so hung up on it that you aren't living in the moment, that can really be debilitating. So sometimes you just have to surrender to the process. What's up, Steven? Steven's joining us. Nice to see you. Steven's joining us from the West Coast. So these early ones are probably pretty, we're having morning coffee with our West Coasters. So nice to see you here, Steven. All right. So that's Mars and Mercury squaring off, Jupiter at the bending of the nodes, a turning point. And again, that turning point comes, always look at things in context. That turning point comes after a conjunction with the Sun and Uranus. So one of the things that I have found is that when you become aware of something that needs to change in your life, going back and doing things the same exact way, it's just not tenable anymore. It sometimes can lead to consequences. I have a friend that I had been sharing some food wisdom with, I guess. He was really interested in changing his diet and moving away from sugar more and inflammation producing foods. And I'd bought him a book. I don't know. I don't want to, activate the what diet is best, but I've had some success with the Whole30 diet where I eliminated a lot of foods and then started slowly adding things back in. And I gifted my friend this book, and he'd started the program. And then he went out to Culver's. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Culver's, but it's like a burger place that has shakes and stuff. And he's like, I went to Culver's with my mom and I just felt so sick afterwards. And I was like, yep, like you've committed to a new path. And when you backtrack, it's like a little reminder of like, hey, you know what? That path isn't going to work for you anymore, you know? And that oftentimes we have to test that a little bit to kind of see where we're at with things. And it's instructive. I've had plenty of moments like that where I've committed to a new way of living, and then I've backtracked, and then it just was like the consequences felt even worse. So that might be an experience that we're having here after the Sun-Uranus conjunction as well. All right, so let's keep going. On the 20th, we have the Sun sextiling Saturn. So this is at the anaretic degrees of Taurus and Pisces. So this is sort of our last gasp of Saturn in Pisces. And it is a positive aspect, so that's something to think about. But we've got the Sun about to move into Gemini 1, exploding our awareness of our options. We've got Saturn about to move out of Pisces 3 into Aries, getting out of the decan that has been associated with hope, with wild swings of emotion, with dreaming, and moving into a decan that is much more yang, much more aggressive, less about dissolving the boundaries that separate us and more about saying, I am an individual. So maybe there is a nice moment potentially of reviewing how far we have come with Saturn in Pisces potentially, or just like saying sayonara. I'm glad that that's not in Pisces anymore. I mean, sometimes it's a difficult transit if it's making activations to challenging planets in your life. This has been opposing my Saturn and Mars, and maybe there will be a different shift for me personally, but I think for all of us, there's going to be this shift towards, Saturn moving into Aries. So I think that taking stock, seeing how far you've come over the Saturn period is a good activity for this day on May the 20th. All right. Steven says, May 20th is my mom's birthday. Well, happy birthday to your mom if she's still around. My mom has a birthday in May too, Stephen. My mom's the May 30th. So she would have been 60. My goodness. I don't remember. 64? 65 this year? What is it? 64. She would have been 64 this year. Oh, I miss her. I miss my mom. But so it goes. Sometimes life throws you curveballs, right? But happy birthday to your mom, and happy heavenly birthday to mine. Tracy, thank you so much for the super sticker, friend. Appreciate you. Thank you for your generosity. That really, every little bit really helps. And thank you so much for contributing today, both in the chat and with the super sticker. Appreciate you. Taku is joining us. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Nice to see you, Taku. I believe joining us from Germany. Steven's mom will be turning 85, having her Uranus in her return potentially, which is cool. Taku made it just in time before we talk about the Saturn ingress. Yes, you did. An interesting one for sure. Before we get there, Taku, we have a last quarter moon also perfecting on the 29th, or it's on the 20th, excuse me. So you can see here, let's go back a few hours here in the day. So the moon in Aquarius 3. So the last quarter moon, you know, we've got the sextile with Saturn. Whoops, that's not what we want. We have this this existential crisis, right? We often have existential crises at the quarter moons. And I know that sounds intense, but it's usually not as bad as it sounds. I think that one of the things that we experience during last quarter moons is a change of heart. Being born with this lunar phase, there have been a lot of things I've changed my mind about. And I think that we are... Aquarius 3 often is called the Lord of Unstable Effort. It is a lunar decan. It is often about knowing when to say when and when to leave a situation that we're frustrated with. So again, if we look at the context of it, we've got the Sun-Uranus conjunction. We've had that Mercury-Mars square. And then we've got Jupiter at the bending of the nodes. And all in the midst of this last quarter moon, where it says, hey, it's time to leave this untenable situation, whether it's a habit, a relationship, a project. This may be time to revisit something temporarily, but then with the ultimate purpose of letting go of it. Yeah, the opposite decan to Aquarius 3, Leo 3, is about standing your ground. So there are times to stand your ground and to make a Herculean effort, and there's other times where it's wiser and smarter to say, you know what, I'm gonna let this one go, and I'm gonna live to fight another day. All right, that's the end of Taurus 3. Do me a huge favor. Please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for the super chat that we've got here. If you want to make a super chat donation, those things are always very helpful. I'm going to stretch out again here. But please like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you can. Stretch out your hamstrings and your hips. And we've got one more decan to go. One more decan to go. And then we will end the show. I'm still recovering from my illness from last week, so just singing in a silly way today. Get my shoulders. You can hear the popping of my elbows. There we go. All right. These monthlies are always a little bit, they're long, but it's an entire month of astrology, and hopefully it is hopefully you're finding it useful, and hopefully it's a good service that we're doing for the community here. But yes, so we're moving forward to Gemini 1, Gemini season. So the sun actually does move into Gemini on the 20th. So if I go back and let's just look at the ingress of the sun into Gemini 1, because there's some really interesting things that are happening here. We'll talk about Gemini 1, but the movement into Gemini 1 begins the malefic enclosure of Mercury and Saturn and Jupiter, excuse me. Because check this out. So you've got Mars here, Saturn here. You've got Mars casting its ray on this side of Mercury, and Saturn casting its ray on this side of Mercury. Jupiter does not witness on each side, so it can't break it up. There's nothing that's breaking it up. Maybe you could consider the moon breaking it up, but that's the enclosure that we're looking at here, right? So we can also see, let's make it blue. Now Mars is making its ray on this side of Jupiter, and Saturn is casting its ray on this side of Jupiter. So this is a dual malefic enclosure like of Mercury and Jupiter, right? And it happens when the sun moves into Gemini, because the sun in Taurus is kind of breaking it up after that, like before that, excuse me. So I think that this is going to be the beginning of a little bit of a hairy few days. And thank you, Tarya. Tarya says, this is a good service and very helpful. Yes. Appreciate you, Tarya. A couple of days we might have a little bit difficult. Let's bring up the decans of Gemini. So here we see the different decans of Gemini, the 8, 9, and 10 of swords, difficult cards. Now, my understanding of Gemini has completely changed since I started studying traditional astrology, especially the Thema Mundi and its association, Gemini, with the 12th house in the Thema Mundi. Thinking about it in depth, it makes a lot of sense. The 12th house is a place sometimes of self-undoing. Sometimes it's associated with mental illness or mental challenges. It is also a liminal space before birth. And there is a story it's called the myth of that talks about a Roman soldier that dies and goes into the afterlife and witnesses people choosing lots to incarnate into the world. And he sees people making all these choices, that some are making choices where they have an awareness of both the pros and cons of that life. And he's seeing people choose to become like, dictators, basically having great power, but at the expense of a lot of suffering. And there's all these lessons about learning how to manifest. And in the Gemini decans and cards, I think what you see is a reflection on feeling the weight of knowing all the different possible lives that you could live and incarnate into, and how that can lead to paralysis by analysis, anxiety over what's to choose, and then finally having to choose something and let go of all other possibilities to manifest something and to incarnate into a body, which we then see in the first decan of Cancer, the joining of body and spirit. So it makes a lot of sense that Gemini is a difficult place to me. I think oftentimes we see it as a childlike toddler. We see it presented as a childlike toddler or something like that in modern pop astrology. I don't necessarily see it that way. I see it as an energy of, first of all, exploration, but also of anxiety because of the weight of choices. So if we go forward in Gemini 1 here we see the 8 of swords. And this is a decan Aston Coppock calls the apple of Eden, because you're biting into the apple of Eden and then you have this awareness of duality. Everything splits into this binary, right? The daimon in this decan is Tethys, the goddess of rivers. So that's interesting because the rivers were the rivers that were tributaries off of Oceanus, which is the kind of the ocean that surrounded the earth in ancient Greek philosophy. So this splitting of waterways in many different directions. So proliferation of options. We have paralysis by analysis, the splitting of attention, awareness of dualities, self-doubt, questioning our path, questioning our lot, right? What choices are before you? Things to think about in Gemini 1. Are you thinking yourself into a state of frustration? Look, we have someone who is blindfolded and bound by their own minds, or by their own mind, right? And these bindings are loose. And if people are, and she's near swords too, so she at any point she can cut these bindings, right? So sometimes we do think ourselves into a corner and into a space that can be very challenging. Do you need more information, or do you need to quiet the mind? The other metaphor I like for Gemini, especially in regards to nature, is the pollination one. The one of the bees that are visiting the different flowers and collecting a little bit of pollen to bring it back to the hive to create honey from it. So you may have to visit many different flowers during Gemini to really understand something. You may have to get information from multiple sources. The point is that that's one part of the face. It is not a permanent place to reside. The information gathering and the option exploring is important, but eventually you have to move forward from it. Okay, that's where we can get ourselves unstuck. What do things look like from the opposite perspective? So sometimes Taurus energy can lead us in a very fixed direction and only seeing things from one viewpoint. Gemini is almost like the antidote to that. It says, well, what if you thought about it this way? What if you asked more questions? It's a Mercury-ruled sign, and Mercury loves to cast doubt. Sometimes it's sacred doubt, right? Because that doubt leads to learning. What are the ethical consequences of this choice? You know, the major arcana tarot card associated with Gemini is the Lovers, and they talk a lot about ethical choices in the Lovers, you know, regards to the apple of Eden too, the temptation. Also, I mean, thinking about the consequences of our choices brings in the myth of that we can see related to the 12th house potentially. So the reflection of choices that we have to make coming into this world of manifestation. Cancer 1 is a place of birth and union and of nurturing something that we want to come into, to grow into full fruition. And getting there is the challenging part. Getting to that point of like, yes, this is what we want to grow. That's where the anxiety part comes in. How can you translate essence in a way that it can be received? That is one of Gemini's superpowers, in my opinion. Mercury is a planet that likes to break things down into pieces. It likes to break things down into digestible bits. And the advantage of that is taking a complicated concept, breaking it down into pieces and communicating it. Mercury being a planet of commerce, of exchanges. Right? It's a messenger. It's a psychopomp. It is something that can help us to digest information in small bits and to understand it and to integrate it, right? So communication often is an important part of this as well. I've always had experiences. Gemini is my 11th house. I've had experiences with large groups of people during Gemini season. I've been to a few astrological conferences during Gemini season. And it was wonderful. It was just kind of this feeling of overwhelm. You're not necessarily getting to talk to one person for a long period of time. You're like those conferences, especially one like the United Astrology Conference that I went to in 2018. You're just going from one person to the next, like a bee going from each flower, collecting a little pollen, little information, and just taking it. It can be really overwhelming, but it's also kind of fun too. All right, so that brings us back to the chart. And here we have that malefic enclosure of Mercury and Jupiter. So the Jupiter one ends on the 22nd. The Mercury one lasts until the 24th. So again, this beginning period, because of the malefic enclosure of those planets, we may be very much feeling like that Eight of Swords card, where we're feeling a little bit paralyzed by all the options, and that could be creating a lot of internal dialogue. I know that sometimes I have Venus in Gemini, the second decan, which is the one where you're laying up awake at night. If I wake up in the middle of the night, like let's say I have to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, sometimes it's hard for me to get back to sleep if I start thinking about what I have to do for the next day or the next week. That just starts the wheels churning in my brain, and then it's hard to shut it off. So how can we resist that temptation to churn through our ideas to the point where we feel paralyzed? Sometimes any choice is better than no choice at all. All right. Taku says, which astrology conference would you recommend visiting, Spencer? Oh, well, I can only tell you my experience of the ones that I've attended. And I'm not sure I'm the greatest authority on this anymore because I'm a bit of a hermit now. I don't super feel comfortable in giant gatherings anymore. But if you do, and that's okay if you do, everyone has a different experience. The United Astrology Conference is amazing. There's one in 2026 in Chicago. I mean, that's like the Olympics of astrology. I mean, there's like over 160 speakers. You know, that was my introduction to astrology. It was a little much, but it was incredible getting to meet all of those folks. And if like you're going to come to America for something like that, that one's really great. I used to help out with something called the Great Lakes Astrology Conference here in my hometown. That one doesn't happen here anymore, but that was fun. That's not really an option. There are a lot of people that really have good experience with NORWAC, with the Northwest Astrology Conference that happens, I believe, in Washington, Seattle, like Washington at west coast of America. That one has a really great commitment to diversity, and to just the vibes just seem really good with that one. So that might be one to, if you want something that's slightly smaller than the United Astrology Conference, I think that would be a good one. Beyond that, I'm not sure. Like, I know that there's a lot of really nice kind of like retreats and things like that that go on at various places. I really like Demetra George. So if you're in Europe, Taku, and you have an opportunity to do anything with Demetra George, like where she goes to Greece, that would be amazing. That's one that I'm kind of like, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I could go to ancient Greek sites with Demetra George. That would be amazing. So anything with her would really be worth your while. What I have found at these astrology conferences is that I can't take in, 100 talks. I think I start to get burnt out on the talks after a while. And I honestly, I just kind of even stopped going to the talks. I like meeting people, but there's only so many astrology lectures that I can take in over like a 3 or 4 day period. But if you do like those workshops, it's specifically focused on like 1 or 2 topics, and you're meeting with a small group of people. And like what Demetra George does with like traditional astrology and like asteroids and things like that, super cool. Really like it. Yeah, Steven says NORWAC is what I would like to attend someday. There are some really cool people that do NORWAC, and NORWAC is, I wouldn't say it's a small conference. It's probably a medium-sized conference, but it's not the overwhelming size of UAC. UAC is huge. It was amazing. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed my time there. And I met a lot of cool people, a lot of like people that familiar with the astrology community. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of doing my thing at this point, and I would love to see some of those friends again. But sometimes the energy for a sensitive person like me is almost a lot to take in. So you'll have to make a determination on your temperament and what works for you. But I think going to a couple can really be a way to start making friends. I think that was what I really enjoyed about the United Astrology Conference and the other conferences that I went to, is just there are people that I still talk to this day that I really got to know through that experience. Okay, so let's move forward off of the malefic enclosure here. And we've got Venus and Mars trining and Sun sextile Neptune on the 22nd. So this Venus-Mars trine, this breaks up the malefic enclosure of Jupiter, I think, because now we have, here we have, check this out. So now Venus is casting its ray in between Jupiter, okay, and Mars. So that is one technique to think about. If you have a planet that's casting a ray that breaks up the distance between the ray that the malefic planet is casting, that sort of breaks it up. So this is giving us some relief, the Venus-Mars trine, from the malefic enclosure of Jupiter. And then the Sun sextiles Neptune. So a day of potential, a little bit of relief from the challenges of the beginning of Gemini 3, or Gemini 2, excuse me. So Venus trine Mars in two fire signs and two decent decans of those fire signs. The middle decans are usually the most fortuitous ones generally. So we may be really starting to understand what we need for our most authentic expression, and that could help alleviate some of our anxiety. When we get to the 24th, we've got the Sun trining Pluto. So here is, let's go off of this here. So here we have the Sun making a trine with Pluto at 3 degrees of Gemini and Aquarius. And then Mercury is conjoining Uranus here at 27 degrees of Taurus. So our awareness of how we might fit within our greater social milieu may lead to some interesting conversations, some unexpected conversations, excuse me, with Mercury and Uranus coming together. We may be having a lot of ideas about how to overcome mistakes that have been made in the past, or make changes so that we can have more successful outcomes moving forward. The same day, a few hours after that, we have probably our biggest transit of the month. Okay. It is Saturn moving into Aries. So this is a big one, right? Anytime we have a planet that is an outer planet that moves slowly, when it changes signs, it is a collective experience. And we have Saturn moving into Aries, applying to Neptune, and Saturn moving into a sign that it is uncomfortable in. It's said to be in its fall. Now, Saturn is a planet that helps bind us to laws. It helps bind us to agreements that we make with one another socially. It is a planet of responsibility, and not just responsibility to ourselves, but a responsibility to others. When it's in its fall, some of those structures that bind together society start to crumble. Some of the caring for our neighbor and our brothers and sisters starts to turn into self-interest. And it's very hard to maintain a functioning society when we are under the illusion of radical independence. And I say that because Saturn is applying to Neptune. We may be really starting to see these terrifying visions of authoritarian control. We may be also seeing that we feel like we have no other choice but violence. It, to me, can be a very difficult time. I think that there were also what I didn't get to talk about with the Saturn and Aries and Neptune is there were a number of events where we had Saturn Neptune stuff coming together, and it was dissolving structures. The last one that was really prominent was the Berlin Wall falling, and that was not Aries, but it was, I believe that was Capricorn. But that's really like the type of energy that we're experiencing, like the dissolving of structures that separated people from one another. And what types of things might be dissolving with Saturn and Aries? I mean, it could even be our individuality is dissolving. Our individual rights are being dissolved. The ability to be an individual. Like, it forces us to be an individual, but it also dissolves our ability to be an individual. It's very confusing. I would say that this transit may bind us to feeling like we have to strike out on our own, that we have to get ours. That's what's being modeled to us in many public forums, is that, well, might makes right. And I just, that is so far away from my worldview that I think that the resistant act to this is kindness, sharing, community building, of sort of tuning out the rhetoric of, well, you know, you need to commit to, I don't know, whatever the propaganda of the hour is. So I think that this is an interesting transit. We're going to be talking a lot about it moving forward. This isn't going to be the final say on it, but a challenging position for Saturn. Saturn rules both Capricorn and Aquarius. So as an individual, you might want to look at those two topics in your life and see that they could be experiencing a little bit of a downturn, or have some challenges around that. You know, when Saturn isn't at its best, that can lead to challenges in those topics of our life. You're going to have plenty of time to figure it out. Saturn doesn't change signs every day. It's a couple years that it hangs out in a sign. But again, I think the counteractive balance to this is caring for your community members, building the structures of interconnectedness rather than just radical independence, not falling under the spell of, I don't know, cowboy philosophy, I guess you could call it, from American history. You know, we have this like kind of like this glamorization of this cowboy motif in America, this Western kind of thing. And it's like this dream of, you know, being able to like go out and just be completely radically independent and not have to answer to anyone or anything. Life just doesn't work that way. There's almost zero examples of that in nature. And that's what makes me really hesitant to like buy into that, is every system, process, ecosystem is interconnected and reciprocal. So there are purposes to this. I mean, maybe when we go through these challenges, maybe it stimulates the opposite reaction. Maybe we have to go through the challenging times to stimulate the next phase of our community building. Because sometimes we just get complacent. And when we have these terrifying visions of authoritarianism and radical, violent independence, sometimes that can motivate us to create a better world, so that we can counteract some of those forces. One of the tenets of Taoism is that the extremes plant the seed of their opposite. So one way to, I think, to stay grounded is that if you start to see things moving to extremes with Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, you know, violence, selfishness, that is planting the seed of its opposite: kindness, community building, etc. And I think that's a great way to go about things to handle this moving forward. All right, let's keep going. And you know, we're going to have many different hosts where Mars is going to be moving through different signs. So it's going to start out with being hosted in Leo. So like kind of this kingship. I don't know, the challenges of maybe a desire for individuals to be kings. Sound familiar? But it will shift as Mars moves through the zodiac. Okay, we'll probably do a greater breakdown on that planet and its movement through Aries, if everyone so desires. But let's keep going with May. So on the 25th, Mercury moves into Gemini. So here is Mercury in Gemini, 25th, end of the day, 25th, and it's sextiling Saturn. Okay, so it has this sextile to Saturn, and also a sextile to Neptune on the next day as well, which brings us into this new moon energy. But let's start with Mercury into Gemini, sextile Saturn. Mercury is very powerful in Gemini. That is its home sign. Mercury proliferates things. It expands our options. It expands our awareness of dualities. It casts a lot of doubt. It helps us to it helps us to ask questions. Sometimes we find answers, and oftentimes the answer leads to 10 more questions. It's great for exchanges. It's great for communication. It's great for exploration. So this is an important kind of movement, and probably giving us the information we need to start making the decisions that we need to make. If we move forward to the 26th here, Mercury is going to be sextiling Neptune here. So just be careful that the information that you're getting is accurate. Double check everything. And that leads us to our new moon at 6 degrees of Gemini. So let's go to the new moon, and we'll talk about that briefly. And here we've got the new moon at 6 degrees of Gemini. Mercury is co-present, very powerful, right? When you have Mercury in its home sign, conjoining the new moon, lots and lots and lots of communications and options, splitting of attention, lots of pollination habits happening. It's going to be sextiling Venus, Neptune, and Saturn by whole sign. It's going to be sextiling Mars, and there's a trine to Pluto. So really no negative aspects, which I think is nice. So I think this could be a fairly positive new moon. It's got all the resources needed to move forward with our communications and with our ideas. We're not having necessarily any blockages from the malefic planets. I think this one looks good. We'll do an entire live stream on it, but themes of exploration of ideas, of maybe feeling a little bit stuck because we have so many options. But the key to navigating Gemini successfully, in my opinion, gather the information. Don't expect a conclusive answer right away. Live with the ambiguity for a period of time, okay? And then eventually, towards the end of the process, then make the decision. Don't get hung up on keeping the options open, but be comfortable with the ambiguity in the information gathering phase, and then be strong enough to make a choice so that you can breathe life into your highest priority. When we get to the 27th, we have Mercury trining Pluto. Okay, so there's the Mercury-Pluto trine. We go back a couple hours while it's perfecting. And this is about 3 degrees of Gemini and 3 degrees of Aquarius. I mean, this is a positive aspect, but it could lead to a really intense fact-finding mission. When we have Mercury-Pluto transits, sometimes we get obsessed with an idea. And I have this square in my chart. I have a Mercury-Pluto square. And sometimes I get really fixated on an idea. And I would say Mercury-Pluto is almost like X-ray vision. Like I need to see into the core of something. And this might be an opportunity to really see into the core of social issues, of having conversations about how we are interacting with one another in society, and getting to the real facts of the matter. And it could be intense. Our communications could be intense, but it could be really it could be healing conversations as well, since it's a trine. So just be careful about getting too fixated on your ideas during this period. Explore, but like don't get so obsessed with exploration that you're not being functional. And then finally, the last aspect of the month comes on May 30th, and it's kind of a big one. This is a happy birthday to my mom here. This is my mom's birthday. I miss her. She left us a few years ago, but really wonderful woman. She had the sun at 9 degrees of Gemini, and she was quite an explorer. She was the type of person that would get 10 books from the library and read them in a week and then get 10 more the next week. And she was a preschool teacher, and she had a beautiful garden. And she just was good at a lot of different things, and an excellent communicator, writer, etc. But this Mercury Cazimi, I think this is going to be a real positive download of information. I think that there will be an awareness of all the different pieces that we need to bring things together. And I think that this is a really pivotal moment because it is a preface to Jupiter moving into Cancer. I think this is like all right, we know every piece that needs to come together. And once Jupiter moves into Cancer on June the 9th, I believe, everything's going to start coming together, I think, in a positive way. And yes, there is this overcoming square from Saturn, which is sort of the elephant in the room with Jupiter and Cancer. But I do think that this is a great opportunity to just get all the facts that you need to be able to have this flourishing of abundance that Jupiter could provide from its exaltation in Cancer. So really important, pay attention to information that you learn on May the 30th, because it could really be the catalyst for moving into hopefully a positive phase for you moving forward. All right, Taku says, yes, maybe we need a Saturn and Aries special. Rachel says, yes, a Saturn and Aries episode. And combine it with Neptune, Taku says, since the live stream failed last time. Yeah. Oh, that was a fun experience. Yeah, I had all sorts of technical issues when we were going to do a Neptune and Aries. And I think we'll look into this. I have to figure out what my schedule is looking like moving forward here. I'm just going to take a brief look at this to see. So today is the Astro of May. Maybe the 9th. I'm going to do the full moon next week in Scorpio. Maybe the 9th I can do Saturn in Aries. So I think that's probably a good idea. I'm a little nervous because oftentimes when I do a live stream, it takes on the energy of the planet and the Neptune one just completely dissolved. It was just like, oh, nope, it's not even going to happen. Like it's going to disappear. But we'll see. I do think that it would be worthwhile to spend some time on Saturn and Aries since it's such an important transit. And the Saturn-Neptune one, I think it's a good idea to revisit the Neptune part of it. And hopefully those two planets will allow us to communicate their essence. Rachel says, this Cazimi will be opposite my natal Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and I am feeling excited about opportunities at the end of the month. Oh, that's awesome, Rachel. I'm excited too. There's been a lot of hard work that Tanya and I have been going through these coming weeks, but man, I'll tell you, if it all comes together, we get all these trees in the ground, and it's going to feel real good. It's going to be so, I can see the vision and how beautiful and abundant it could be. It's just all the elements just need to come together. And I think that, this is, as you see the process unfold, this might be a really nice pivotal moment for that. So I'm wishing all of you a fortunate Mercury Cazimi. All right, friends. Well, that is what I've got for May. Just a preview of June. So let's talk about June here just real quick. So in June, Venus is going to move into Taurus, a nice improvement of of Venus's dignity from Aries into Taurus. It's always a nice transition. A ton of stuff moving into Cancer. Mercury, Jupiter, really important, and the Sun moving into Cancer in June. Jupiter moving into its exaltation, something astrologers often look forward to because Jupiter really does well in Cancer. Really the ability to bring projects into fruition and nurture them is improved. Yes, we will talk about the overcoming square from Saturn because that could limit how expansive Jupiter can be. But like I've said in the past, I would rather have a benefic planet in a really good place while a malefic planet is in a really bad place than to have nothing helping the Saturn or the malefic planet that's troubled. So sometimes life brings us these things. Sometimes there's positive things and negative things happening simultaneously. That's just life. Mars will be moving into Virgo in June, kind of breaking new ground with a new sign. And then Mercury is going to move into Leo as well. So we'll talk about that in the next monthly broadcast. And of course, I have a hexagram for you. So here we have hexagram number 37. Whoops, let's bring this to the stage. Let's get the right thing on here. There we go. What is the essence of the Astrology of May 2025? And we have the hexagram number 37, which translates to the family, the household, close-knit groups, playing your part, establishing expectations and serving as an example, creating mutuality and trust. Sound familiar? We've been talking about creating reciprocal relationships recently. So this is a hexagram that talks about playing the right role. You know, like everyone has a role to play, especially when we're dealing with challenging circumstances in the collective. Sometimes we get overwhelmed with all the problems that we want to alleviate. And sometimes we just have to pick one and do something that's important to us and try to do the best we can with that particular issue. For me, one of the things that I think is inspiring is being a good steward of the land and to change the land from a place of, I'll tell you, the corner that we're working on was just like a dumping ground for trash, industrial waste and crap. And healing one little tiny corner of our land that we are stewards of, it feels really good. Like creating an oasis for native pollinators and for creating a food forest, you know, not only for ourselves, but for the creatures that we share this land with. The birds that will have more berries to eat and the insects that will have pollination opportunities. That feels really good to me. And that's something that I can really commit my heart and mind and body towards and sacrifice my heart, mind and body towards. But you have to figure out what's important to you. I have a friend who has a special needs daughter, and he's been really on the front lines of protecting rights for people of that nature. You just have to find what resonates with you. And I think that that's what May's teaching us is we all have our roles to play, and we all have our specific areas of interest that we can step up and try to protect and work through. We have 3 changing lines here. The second changing line says, not chasing after whim or desire. Remain in the center and prepare the food. Perseverance brings good fortune. That sounds like a good advice for Taurus season. Remain in the center and prepare the food. Stay centered, eat well. Jack Balkin says to remain in the center means to cultivate the virtues of modesty and moderation in your actions and desires. To prepare the food means performing everyday labors, living up to your duties, and taking care of others. So this is about quietly carrying out your obligations, like just staying centered, doing what needs to be done, not doing more than you need to do for that period of time, resting when you need to rest. All of it can help manifest better outcomes. The 4th line is changing, and that says, enriching the household, create good fortune. Jack goes on to say, enriching the household means working for others rather than merely for yourself, an excellent antidote to Saturn in Aries, Consider how you can contribute to the economy of your group. Others depend on you for sustenance, and whether material or spiritual, do not let them down. If you are willing to be of service, you will enjoy great good fortune. Your modesty and benevolence will make you invaluable to others, and your good deeds will enrich you as well as them. That's the secret of Taurus abundance, friends, is it's not just about hoarding for yourself. It's about how can you create abundance to share. The other cool thing about planting all these fruit trees and doing all this garden planning is Tanya and I are excited not just about providing food for ourselves, but for having enough wealth to share, about having enough food to share with our neighbors. You know, like if I plant 7 pawpaw trees in my backyard, I'm going to have more pawpaws than I know what to do with, Rachel, right? And I'm going to be able to, like, we got inspired to plant that particular tree because we have a neighbor in our neighborhood already who has pawpaw trees in their yard, and they put out at their their sidewalk a basket of pawpaws. It says, "We've got more than we can even eat. Just take one and enjoy." And it was like, wow, that's cool. Like this, and that was like one of the first times I had a pawpaw. I was like, these are delicious. And that's the type of thing that we would like to do with this type of project. So how can you enrich not only yourself but others through your good fortune? Indigenous wisdom speaks towards the wealthy not being those who have hoarded the most, but the ones that have the most to give away. And that to me is really, it's a life altering philosophical shift. So there's one more changing line. It says, the king approaches the family. Do not worry, good fortune. This describes a relationship of trust and mutual affection between the leader of a group and its members. The leader is magnanimous, and he looks after the interest of others rather than trying to control them, aggrandize himself, or maximize his power. Hence, they have no reason to fear his authority. The leader exercises a beneficial influence through his character and through the example he sets for others. Because there is love and mutual respect, people can be open with each other. The result is happiness and success. Apply these principles to your own life. Treat those under your authority and care with kindness and magnanimity. Behave with dignity and integrity as a great king would, and set a proper example for others to follow. Then all of your efforts will meet with good fortune. It's great advice. You know, if you're in a leadership position, be kind and be of service to others. It's not about your own power and not about your own ego. It's about doing the most good for the most people around you. That's the only reason to pursue power, in my opinion. This is changing to the hexagram number 14, which translates to sovereignty, great possession, possession in great measure. I mean, this talks about being able to move under your own power. This means that you are able to, be like a great king that is able to move under their own power in service of their community. This is being able to take charge and move forward in your life and guide it in the direction that you want it to go. It encourages us to stay modest and unassuming while we are enjoying this ability to move forward. So this is a great opportunity to be able to have great self-discipline, to be able to move under your own power, but to do so in a way that benefits not only yourself, but your community. If you act in a way that only benefits yourself, you are planting the seeds of your downfall and your demise. If you are acting in ways that serve your community and are a blessing for those where you share your abundance, there's no reason for anyone to usurp your position, because your actions are benefiting and have reciprocal beneficial relationships with others. Really important idea to consider. Take this from a Leo ascendant with the sun in the 12th house who has lived it both ways. If you act out of your own selfish desires to dominate others, you will be planting the seed of your undoing. All right. If you act out of service for the people in your community, your abundance will multiply, and your good energy, your goodwill, it will keep circling back around in this endless abundance of good nature with other people. Something to really consider. Rachel says you need host a pawpaw potluck. That would be super fun. Yeah, where we can have ice cream and smoothies. It's going to be great. We'll have to have you up here, Rachel. You have to make a field trip to Michigan. You can be part of our pawpaw potluck. Tracy says, can you please share the reference for the hexagram? Is it Jack Balkin, Jack M. Balkin, The Laws of Change is my favorite translation. He is a Yale University law professor and has a very interesting understanding of, and is an excellent writer. My favorite translation by far. Steven says, amazing monthly overview. Thank you, Steven. Appreciate you. All right. He needs to call his parents. It's their anniversary today. Happy anniversary to your parents, Steven. Yes, please. Rachel says, yes. Pawpaw potluck featuring Rachel Fletcher. Be great. All right. We've got one more thing for you, and then we'll let you go for the afternoon. So I have an animal for you. It's the most Taurus thing to ever Taurus. It's jellyfish. I know the most Taurus thing to ever Taurus would be literally a bull. The second most Taurus thing to ever Taurus, with especially with Saturn in the last gasps of Pisces, is the jellyfish. Jellyfish is an animal that teaches us to go with the flow, to be receptive, to just release anxiety, to let things unfold the way that they are supposed to unfold, to just drift with the currents of our life. I can't think of anything more Taurus-y than drifting with the current of your life and letting the good things come to you without forcing the issue. This is an excellent, excellent opportunity to practice acceptance and to do the best that you can with the energy and resources that you have without trying to force anything. If I've learned anything about efficiency, it's that you do what you can in the time period and the resources that you have, and you do no more or no less. Every time that I've tried to force things and overdo something, it leads to its opposite. So here's an example. I spent 9 hours pulling rocks out of the ground. It was a little bit too much. And then I had to rest for like 3 to 4 days because I got ill. Because of the extra effort I had to put in, I had to take extra time out. If I had maybe paced myself over a longer period of time, which in my defense was difficult because the weather was not cooperating, maybe I wouldn't have gotten sick. Do you see what I'm saying? So how can we pace ourselves? Jellyfish can teach us that. Go with the flow of your life. Surrender to the currents around you. Great animal for May as far as just taking it easy, releasing anxiety, going with the flow. All right, friends. That's what I've got for you today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Appreciate you. Do me a favor, please like the video, subscribe to this channel. It really helps us with the algorithm. Go over to follow me on Instagram, Blue Sky, etc. at Spencer Michaud. If you want garden updates, I'll post some stuff there. If you want to reach out for a reading, go to spencermichaud.com. If you want to sign up for any of our classes, including our Jupiter webinar that we're going to be doing when Jupiter is in Cancer. It should be an excellent Jupiter webinar. Appreciate all of you. Have a wonderful May. Have a wonderful Taurus into Gemini season. Thank you so much for all of the participation today, and appreciate you. Thank you, everyone who showed up here today. Thank you, Rachel, Tracy, Tarya, Taku, Stephen, Heather. Thank you so much for being here today. And we'll see you the next time, friends. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you the next time. Peace.